Good evening. It is good to be back with you this evening. I'm thankful to be here. I'm pretty thankful that you're here too. Might be a little awkward if it was just me here tonight, but it's good to be with you. Hope you've had a good day. I know some were gathering with family, some weren't doing that today. Hope that went well for you. Glad you're back this evening. And on that note, a tired sermon. I think I might have received the most questions on the outset, before the sermon, about this sermon that I ever have about any other sermon. People came in seeing the handout, came by asking, tired sermon? Does that mean that you're tired? Does that mean we're supposed to be tired by the sermon? What does that mean? And this might be me giving you permission to sleep during the sermon. If you spent the afternoon with family or other holiday activities, you might need a nap. And so maybe that's what this is about. That just from the beginning of the sermon, even the title, wait, that's not what I want to do. Or maybe it is that after this sermon's over, if you weren't tired, I'm sorry, you're going to be, okay? But that is the question, right? Are you tired? Are you tired? And although that might be a very appropriate question for a holiday weekend time, or any time during the months of November, December. You could throw January in there too, right? It's after the first of the year, and some people are really excited, but then you get tired really quickly. But it might be a good question for any time. It seems like it is common for us as humans. It might even be that it's somehow worse given our culture. We're so busy and we're always running and to and fro and always going that just about any time of the year, if someone asked us, are you tired? You might say, yeah, and you might not be being pretentious. You might be honest that, yeah, I'm just worn out. But the good part is that God gives us rest. And that would be another way, a slightly less playful way to entitle this sermon. You could say just the word rest, or a study of rest. And that was my working title until actually I changed it last week. That was my working title, and I thought, well, a study of sermon. Those sermon titles, that's just kind of a boring title. So I changed it to tired sermon. You're welcome. But God wants us as His people. And I mean that in two ways. As His people that are His creation, as humanity, but then you take it up another step as His own, as His children, let's say Christians. He wants us to have rest. It is not God's desire for us to run around ragged and worn out all the time. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That's not what He wants. Now, there might be times when we need to reach a low point where we're worn out from sin. Okay, I get that. That's not what God wants as a whole. He doesn't want us to be tired. That's why He gives us rest. To look at this idea of being tired and God giving us rest, let's consider these three arenas of thought tonight, these three categories. First, let's go back to the Sabbath. When you think about rest from a biblical standpoint, that you can't hardly think about it for very long or read very much in the Bible about rest and God and His people without coming to that word Sabbath, the Sabbath. Then we'll discuss the principle or even some principles. And then we'll end with the future. Let's take a look at that one that heads it off, the Sabbath. For this, we turn all the way back to just the second chapter of Genesis, where God rests. God rested. Genesis chapter 2, we'll be reading the first 3 verses tonight together. After you have the basic outline of creation from Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, to the end when God looks at what He had created in those 6 days and He saw that it's very good. That's where you're at in the end of Genesis chapter 1. And then we read these 3 verses. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. Now, we're going to insert a parenthetical commentary, okay, not trying to add to the Bible, between 2 and 3 here, just to observe that God doesn't actually ever get tired. I believe I said that this morning, right? That he doesn't sleep, he doesn't take naps. There's even a psalm that addresses that, right? That he who keeps Israel neither sleeps nor slumbers. It's really poetic, but it's also really powerful truth. And so that God being the Almighty, having all power, means that God can do the amazing, unthinkable things, and he doesn't have any less power when he's done. He doesn't have less energy. Like, we do something, we got to burn up, we use up our energy. That's why we are tired from a more physiological standpoint, right? You got to recharge the batteries. That's not God. And so when we read this, and we can have fun with it sometimes and say, well, Genesis 2:2 says God rested. He must have been tired. You could think of it here with God as a way of marking the end of his creative work. Some have said you could think of it as God ceased his work. That is part of the meaning of the word there for rested. It means you stop working to rest, usually. But there's a principle being established here that starts here all the way near the beginning, that becomes a more concrete reality for God's people with the law of Moses. We'll be there momentarily. Let's finish this text for now. Verse 3. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, made it special. There's something unique about what we call today Saturday, the seventh day in the week. Even though our culture is trying to make Monday the first day, right? And all that. But Saturday, as far as I know, is still the seventh day, even in the names of our days. But then he adds this, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. And so God sets an example of here you work 6 days and then you take a day off. And God's day, though, even in the language here, continues. It's longer than a day here, all right, because he's done with that. He's not creating still. He doesn't start back Sunday and create more here. You'll even notice that in Genesis 1, the 6 days of creation, they all have things like evening and morning. First day, evening and morning. Second day. See if you find that about the seventh day. And there's some allusions later, some of the Psalms and things, to God entering his rest and resting in his creation permanently after that. He's got a really long Saturday off, okay? That's kind of how it's portrayed here. But let's go now to the time when the Sabbath for Israel is instituted. For that, we turn together to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus 20, beginning at verse 8. One of the 10 commandments, one of the few of the 10 that has some explanation added to it. There's more than just the statement. For instance, the one right before it in verse 7 is you get the commandment, you shall not do this, and you get a slight bit of information added to it. It's all one statement still. You get 8 to 11 as far as we even have it in verses for this one. Exodus chapter 20, 8 through 11. He says, remember the Sabbath day. Remember it. So don't forget it weekly. You could also put it in your mind tonight as remember what this points to. Remember that this goes back to what God did. He's about to bring that up. But remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. God made it holy. You treat it that way. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath, or is a rest day, a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock. It's pretty all-inclusive. The sojourner even who's within your gates. For, verse 11 says, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Some of this is quoting, or at least almost verbatim, from what we just read in Genesis chapter 2. There's some connecting lines here. And then let's look also at the parallel to this one. Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is when Moses re-gives the Ten Commandments to this new generation that has come up now and about to enter the promised land. The first generation that left Exodus, that received Exodus 20, they're dead. The second generation is going to have Exodus 20 in some form, but Moses, as he's going through and reviewing and reminding, he brings back specifically the Ten Commandments. But watch for any differences in this one at least. Let's read it. Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 through 15. Observe the Sabbath day. So, slight difference here in our English translation. Remember the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath day. Now we're going to be tracking right along. To keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. You get the 6 days, rest on the seventh. Nobody that has any relation or connection to you is to do any kind of work on that day. Then you get to verse 15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. Do you see anything different here? Yeah, the reason is different, right? So the first time, and they're not meant, I'm not saying that they contradict, they supplement each other. They both are true and they both work. But it's just interesting that the first time it's given, you go back to what God did in creation. And not that he's removed that, but now it's almost maybe you put the two together and you get this fuller picture. You also remember what God did for you in your slavery. I don't know how many Sabbaths, how many Saturdays off they had in Egypt. When you're a slave, not that there's not ever any downtime, and I mean, if you don't ever let your slave rest, and that might have been some of that in Egypt, they were pretty hard on them at times, but you don't really have the idea of rest, right? So God set you free, redeemed you. You remember that. Now he wants you to take at least one day every week to rest. Now, we could keep going, and that's beyond, at least maybe that might be for another lesson or another setting. But you could think of how not only is there the weekly Sabbath for Israel, there is 7 other Sabbath feast days that were tacked on every year. And then you have every 7 years a time to let the land rest. And then 7 times 7, that next year, so 49, and then 50 is the year of Jubilee, when there's lots of resetting and renewing and resting. The land, things are given back to tribes they belong to. Slaves are set free. A lot of things happen in that time. And it all is based around this core idea of God placing importance on rest. Rest. Let's turn now to Mark. And let's look at the Son of Man. The Sabbath day as a weekly observance commanded was given to the civil, fleshly nation of Israel. And so, we could say this in a simple way, that as Christians living under the new covenant, and just so you don't think I'm going that direction, okay? No, we are not required, we're not commanded, it's not a part of our covenant to have this weekly seventh day observance. Now, there is another day that we observe in some different ways. We observe the day our Lord rose. Not as a Sabbath in the same way. Jesus came and fulfilled the old covenant completely. But we might also be careful that we don't just wave the proverbial hand that says that was just Old Testament stuff. We don't need to talk about that. We don't need to know about that. That was old law. That was Moses stuff. We don't need to know anything about that. There's still some things to be learned from that Sabbath. There's still some principles. We're going to get to more of those in a moment. But look at Mark chapter 2, verses 27 and 28. Here is Jesus in his earthly life himself living under the old covenant. But he makes this observation when his disciples are ridiculed about some of the things they were doing on the Sabbath day. Now, we don't have time to study this whole paragraph, or not the occasion at least. But as they're bringing these accusations, and he asks them some questions, and then he lays down two ideas. The first one's in verse 27. He says to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Part of where this comes from is that over the period of years, some of the Jews had begun to make the Sabbath such a difficult thing to keep. They had added all these extra rules and ideas where it wasn't really helpful anymore. It was so restricted. And he says, you're forgetting that God made this for you to rest. If it's not a restful thing, if it's not something that you actually get rest from, then you've missed the point. Sabbath is for man, not the other way around. And then verse 28, so the Son of Man, both as a messianic title, he is the Messiah who came to fulfill the law and be the ultimate one, ultimate Israelite. But also, the Sabbath is made for man. He is the Son of Man. He's also the ultimate human. As I think Rod mentioned this morning, he's the real man. He says, so the Son of Man, verse 28, is Lord, even of the Sabbath. So when we think about Jesus and his relationship to the Sabbath, he comes and he fulfills the Sabbath. He comes with a rest that is what the Sabbath for Israel every week is pointing to. Now, two more passages before we have to move on. One is in Colossians chapter 2, a word of balance. Colossians chapter 2, we were in that same chapter this morning in verses 12 through 15, looking at Jesus and our burial and resurrection with him, the work of his cross. And then right after that, in verses 16 and 17 of Colossians chapter 2, and see, I did it again. This is just not my secretary or script writer's day. I said I did it. I just kind of let the cat out of the bag there. But that should be 16 and 17, okay? And I realized after the fact that this morning I had the Psalm 86, the Psalm 85, completely messed up, right? I mean, we were in Psalm 46, and then it was Psalm 86, and my dyslexia was in there somewhere. I don't know. It's still popping up. It's Christmas, okay? All right, so Colossians 2, 16 and 17. If you try to do 26 and 27, well, enjoy that. Colossians 2, 16 and 17. He says, therefore, so because of who you are in Jesus, you're dead to the sin, you're dead to this old ordinances. Let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to festival or new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come. This is where we come and say, we belong to the Lord of the Sabbath. He says these things are a shadow, but the substance belongs to Christ. So a very clear passage telling us that if someone tries today to tell you, no, you better keep the Sabbath or you're going to be in trouble. You're not obeying the commandments. Paul says, don't let them do that, because that's part of your liberty in Christ. But then I also added Romans 14, 5 through 12, as a balance there. We're not going to read that one. That's something for you to read on your, you can call that homework if you like. But there are some cautions there almost on the other side. So a word of balance, to be careful. Some of these days, and one man esteeming one man esteeming another, be careful. Paul says in Colossians, don't let them bind it on you. But he also says in Romans 14, be careful what you might try to bind on someone else, either to do or not do, that might not be actually based in truth. Be careful. And so when it comes to the Sabbath day itself, we could say, no, the Christian's not required to do that. But we might be careful with saying, if you want to pick a day, whether that's Saturday or Monday or whatever, as your rest day, and even a day to spend extra time getting closer to God, And that might be something to think about, the Sabbath. Now, the principle. We're going to go back to the gospel accounts now in Matthew chapter 11. Let's read Matthew chapter 11, 28 through 30 together. We have a couple of songs, we were talking about that earlier, that were based from this passage. Someone observed once that there has still yet to be a greater invitation than these three verses in our Bibles. It's just unmatched in history. Matthew 11, 28 through 30. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus says, I'm not going to stand over you like someone that's waiting for you to fail. Jesus says, I'm not going to stand and as this figure that is all authority. Jesus has all authority, but that's not how, that's not all that I am. He just stands over you and watches. No, I'm gentle and lowly in heart. You come to me. And the principle here then, even coming out of the Sabbath and the rest, is when I come to the Lord of the Sabbath, when I come to Jesus, He's the one that will actually give me true, lasting rest. And here it isn't so much about physical rest or mental rest, although those are interrelated. They might be more connected, those to even our spiritual rest, than we might sometimes think. But this is about that deeper rest, where I'm resting in God. I'm resting in Jesus. I'm leaving behind the burden of guilt, the burden of anxiety. That's where some of that mental tiredness comes in. And I'm coming to Jesus. And then you can see Luke chapter 4, and that's where he starts his ministry by reading a passage from Isaiah that he's announcing, now that he's here, the year of Jubilee. Jesus came to bring the real Jubilee, the real rest. He's the one, the only one that can really give that rest. But on a even more practical note, look at these two examples. One's in Mark chapter 8, verses 23 through 25. And the other's in Mark 6. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus is on the boat, right, with his disciples. And it's the big storm on the Sea of Galilee. What's Jesus doing? He's asleep. Now, it might be stating the obvious, but when Jesus was in his earthly life, he took time to rest. Now, there's more going on here for sure with the storm and the fact that there's the whole irony here that he's asleep and they have to wake him up to still the storm. But it's a reminder to me that Jesus got tired and took a nap on a boat with his disciples. Or Mark chapter 6 is when he sent them out to spread the message of the good news. And they come back telling him about all the things they've done, and what's the first thing he does? He says, come here. Let's go away for a while. It doesn't really work too well because the crowds realize they're there and they chase them, and that's when they're running out of food and it becomes a whole problem. But he tells the disciples, we need to come away and rest and spend time in prayer. We need to find an isolated place to rest. So it starts with this rest for your soul, but rest is so important that God even recognizes we need to physically rest. Have you noticed that when you're worn out, when you're tired, you don't always think very clearly? That's part of why we say if you're going to make a big decision in life, sleep on it. Now part of that, there's other things happening, but part of it seems to be just make sure you're rested. Make sure you get a good night's sleep tonight. Of course, then if you're like me, you can't sleep because you're trying to still think about the problem or the decision, right? So it's not perfect, but ideally, in an ideal world, sleep on it, get up, refreshed, your head's clear, and make the decision. That's Elijah in 1 Kings 19. He's just had this triumphant moment. What did we call it this morning? A mountaintop experience. He's defeated the prophets of Baal. He's shown all of Israel who's the real God. Best day of his life, maybe. And the next thing you know, he's running for his life, and he is depressed. And part of what God has Elijah do is eat and take some naps. Now, God does more than that. Remember, we said it's not just physical, it's spiritual, mental, emotional, all of these. But he has him rest and eat. Reset. Hit the reset button, Elijah. You're not thinking clearly at the moment. Wonder how often we might make better decisions in life in general or even in spiritual matters if we weren't so tired all the time. And we didn't feel like we were being dragged from one thing to the next. And if you're not going to something, you're working on the schedule to figure out how you're going to fit everything on your calendar. And we're afraid of missing out on something. And with our calendars full, we're actually missing out on something else that matters. Resting. Having time to rest. But we're too busy. And as a culture, and we do this with a lot of things, right? We go to extremes. But as a culture, we either make it all about being productive and getting work done and doing things and taking your kids to this and that, and we're too busy, or we go the other direction and we're lazy. And everything is about leisure. And of course, that even then you can get tired going and doing recreational things too. But we make entertainment the only form of rest. And I'm bad about this as probably anybody. Now let me watch a movie or a TV show or play a game or something, and that's going to be my rest. And that has its role in resetting and refreshing. Sometimes you just need to tune out. I get it. But that's not all there is to rest. There's meditation. There's just taking a moment, might be 2 minutes, to just breathe. And it gives us a little time to reflect, to think about who we are, think about where we are spiritually. If we're always busy, maybe even doing things related to the church and spiritual life, and we never take moments in that life to refocus, we might just get worn out. And we might get a little too tired. So there's this. There's the healthy rhythm. That's your word there, rhythm. There's that work, life, family rhythm or cycle. There's the rhythm of work, rest, play. What is it? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But then someone came along and added to that and said, all play and no work makes Jack a mere toy. You can't, either one of those are problematic. And so part of why I chose tonight is, part of what I'm adding to my 2023 goals is I want to do better in 2023. That is next year. Yes? This is 2022? Okay. But I want to do better about finding that healthy balance, that rhythm in life between work and relaxation, family, all of those. And it starts with coming to Jesus daily for rest and builds from there. Let's turn in our Bibles now to the book we call Hebrews. We've seen the Sabbath, where it started with God and Israel. We've seen the principle of coming to Jesus and finding rest from day to day even. And now we close with the future. Staying awake to have rest. It's like staying awake while you're driving so you can get home and actually rest. You get those backwards and you might not get home. That's what Hebrews chapter 3, verses 12 through 19 have for us. He's using the example here of ancient Israel once more in the wilderness and how they heard the message. That wasn't the problem. And yet, they rebelled against it. In these two chapters, 3 and 4, the Hebrew writer preaches a short sermon from Psalm 95. And so let's read a few of these verses. In verse 14, after saying we need to be careful that we don't miss out on this, he says, "For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is written, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion." And then he goes back to that, asks questions in verses 16 through 18 about ancient Israel. So, verse 19, we see that they were unable to enter. To enter what? To enter God's rest. The promised land was meant to be rest because of unbelief. Therefore, chapter 4, still yet, therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as it did to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. And although it says his works were finished from the foundation of the world, it says, they shall not enter my rest. Verse 4 says, he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage, Psalm 95, he said, they shall not enter my rest. Since, verse 6, therefore it remains for some to enter it. And those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Again, he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David, long afterward, in the words already quoted from Psalm 95. Now 9 and 10, that's where he brings it home. For if Joshua had given them rest, first generation dies, doesn't enter the rest, promised land. Makes sense. But Psalm 95 is after the second generation did enter the promised land. So what is Psalm 95 talking about in David's day? Then he says, if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. So while we work to have a balance and a rhythm in our lives now, the Hebrew writer says there's still a rest that remains yet to be for the people of God. Work to enter it, but it's still in the future. We usually call that rest heaven. He calls it here entering God's rest. You work for Jesus, and then you enter the rest forever with Jesus. A tired sermon. Are you tired tonight? Worn down? Weary? Sleepy? Thinking, okay, when is he going to quit? Come to Jesus. He will give you rest now and in the future as we stand and sing together.